no, it's been,
Yep, it's been a
it's
while.
both because it's been like 18 months, also because you have some of the best looking COVID hair that I've seen that I'm forced to comment on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, that's
Yep. So how have you been? It's been a while, yeah, that we met.
yeah, it's been a little while. Yeah, yeah. How do I sum it up since last time that I saw you in person? Yeah, I don't think I was doing layer 5 full time at the time. I don't remember.
Yep. I
Um,
think that was Cube San Diego, I guess, the last time we spoke.
okay, yeah. Um,
Before the whole world went crazy.
yeah, yeah. Before, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, nice to see you.
Mhm. Yep.
How are things at well, what's your current focus at on Linkerd or at Buoyant? Is it all open stuff or some closed stuff? Some
Mhm. Yeah. It's all open source. I'm working on the Linkerd project itself full time. So the current project that I've been working on is actually SMI. Is actually SMI extension for Linkerd. We haven't spoken about it in the call, etc. But I've been working from the last 1.5 week full time on that project, where just like Wiz and other, now in Linkerd we have these extension models, right? Where we added that recently in a recent release where we have Wiz and other stuff as extensions, Wiz and Aegir, etc. So we are now trying to create an SMA extension that installs an adapter that converts stuff, etc. So that Linkerd doesn't need to have all the SMI details in the repository. Yeah,
nice.
that is something that I've been focusing on recently.
Hey,
That's
Tharn, are y'all going to use the SMI controller SDK that Nick and I have been working on?
The SMA SDK Go that I've been using right now is that a different thing? The SMA controller.
Yeah, yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
can sync with you after. We're basically trying to put all the common things that you might need to use SMI and like convert, like basically watch and convert
Mm-hmm.
object
Yep.
mutations into whatever you need for your implementation. So yeah.
That is actually useful stuff because that is what I've been doing currently. I've been using the sample controller model, right, where you create clients for everything. That I've been doing right now. So that would be useful. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out.
Okay, awesome.
good. Well, most of all of us, at least, have name recognition with the next of us. Otto, one of the probably key ingredients here, is going to be about 10 minutes late, so hopefully another 6 minutes. So I'll kick us off though and kind of introduce the why it is that we're going to spend maybe an hour, maybe less together. Um, so thanks for coming. By the way, uh, there's a couple of folks that whose names I think I recall. A couple of Michelle. Are there a couple other OSM folks on the call other than?
Delian's here, and I think Edu's going to join us in just a minute or so. Let me.
Sounds like Edu's here as well.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm here as well. Hey, everyone.
Edu's been doing all of
And I'm
our
here as well.
performance measurement, like building tools to measure the performance of OSM on our side. He's like the expert of all things related to performance. And he then goes into the mesh project and OSM project and basically figures out how to make it better and more performant. So I'm glad he's here.
Well, that sounds extremely relevant. Edu, good. And then, okay, good, great. Well, so I'm stalling just slightly just to try to make sure that I think both Nick and Otto are coming. But so to introduce the topic, this is maybe one of two or maybe one of three conversations on this subject. So the reason that we're meeting kind of off cycle for both service mesh performance and for SMI is that service mesh performance as an open specification was submitted for incorporation into the CNCF at a sandbox level. At the same time, so was Meshery both as an implementation of SMP, service mesh performance, and as the conformance tool for SMI. and Meshry as doing a number of other things, managing WebAssembly filters, managing 10 service meshes, doing a variety of things. As the CNCF TOC members were able to spend just the briefest amount of time trying to understand the alignment between the projects, therein lie their question: what is the alignment and overlap and underlap? And as the CNCF, how are we communicating the service mesh story in some respects? There were some suggestions on the position of authority that the CNCF has and how we might have tooling and to determine what is a service mesh and whether or not someone is implementing a service mesh and that kind of a thing. There was a lot of there were a few different TOC members who I consider were being great stewards of the CNCF, of the projects that are represented. And there were also, like I do much of the time, having to try to make quick decisions or formulate thoughts based on ignorance. So they're ignorant of a lot of the details of, well, really all three of those projects that I just mentioned. And so their question is, how do those align, or can they align? Should they meld into one? Should they meld into two? Should they stay as three? And so we're here trying to do some of that diligence. And so the direction of today's discussion was really to take maintain service mesh performance maintainers, so Sunku, Nick Jackson, and Otto Vandershoff, and myself, through sort of a presentation from SMI, specifically on metrics, to help this other collection, this other project really understand SMI metrics much better. And that's kind of the goal. That's sort of overarching the goal is for us collectively to say, to verbalize or articulate in written form, here's how we think that the projects are complementary, where they don't do things, maybe how they all come into one or stay separate, whatever that answer is, but is to just earnestly explore that. And we start by cross presentations, helping explain what the projects are about back and forth to each other. And so Tarun's the first up. So Tarun, if you don't mind, like, what is SMI metrics and how are they implemented, using Linkerd as an example?
Yep. So I mean, there are a lot of different meshes, etc. Right? So there are every mesh has a different way of getting metrics out of it. The metrics here are about applications and anything, right? Like for example, observability is a key component of service meshes, right? It is a pretty showed off feature, and it is obviously useful too, right? To build dashboards around how many the latencies, the success count, etc. All the P50 latencies, etc. Right? That are pretty useful for any organization to measure the SLOs, etc. So as the problem here is that each mesh gives out the metrics in a different way, in a different format, etc. And it would be really nice to have a single API that you could use to get metrics out of any different mesh, right? So that you can build tools on top of it that consume these metrics and do a specific task, etc. So an obvious example here is Flagger, which does canary deployments on any mesh. This is possible because it can read metrics directly through SMI metrics. I think they also they have implementation specific to the mesh too, but I'm not sure here. But the conclusion here is that tools like Flagger, etc., can be built that consume these metrics in a uniform manner without having to know how a specific mesh responds to metric queries, the format, etc. So this is solved by having an SMI Metrics Adapter. This is not like an adapter because it is not it is kind of converting stuff, but it is not unlike other adapters because there are no resources here. First, for example, you would not apply a traffic metrics resource to a Kubernetes API. You do a traffic split. So there is this adapter API that repo is in the SMI metrics repository in the service mesh interface organization. Once you install that adapter, during the installation, you specify which mesh is there in your cluster, and if you have any changes there. So for example, with Linkerd, you can specify the Prometheus URL if you have a custom namespace and things like that. So with some configuration like that, once you install the adapter, you can have a uniform way of getting metrics. Should I do a demo or should I post links?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, demos are always always illicit questions.
Yep. So I actually went ahead and installed a cluster with SMA Metrics. Just wanted to be sure that it works. So can you see my screen?
I can. And Tarun,
Yep.
actually, just to recharacterize part of what you were saying,
Mhm.
let me know if this is an apt characterization or not.
Yep.
But part of the difference that you are articulating between SMI metrics as an adapter and how it differs a little bit from some of the other specs is that your these external applications like Flagger, as the example, are are consuming these signals, are consuming these metrics, whereas with the other specifications, they might be much more
Applying
about,
stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So like Lee said, with SMA metrics, it's mostly on the consumer side. All of the adapter doesn't apply anything. It just reads stuff from your cluster and renders that and renders those metrics in a uniform manner, irrespective of the mesh, right? Is irrespective of the mesh inside the cluster. So I'm running a Kubernetes cluster. I'm not sure about the version, but the Linkerd version is the latest version, because we did some changes in the latest version of the Linkerd that are not the defaults in the SMA metrics repo as of right now. I had to update some of the values.yaml to take account of the latest changes. So once that is there, you can so I went ahead and installed the SMI adapter by using a Helm command. I rendered the chat and then applied that. So because I did that, you can see a deployment in the default namespace called SMA metrics. And as you can see, a Linkerd installation is also there. If you do Linkerd check, this should be all green, etc. Linkerd is a service mesh project in the CNCF ecosystem. So now we have a Linkerd installation and also the adapter installed. So because we did that, once you install the SMA adapter, you get a API resources actually. Is it API services? Give me a second. So once you do that, it also installs an API service. So a Kubectl API service is like a general way of it's like a building an extension, API server extension on Kubernetes, so that you can consider this service as also an extension in Kubernetes with all the TLS guarantees, etc. Right? With all the security guarantees, etc. It's like Kubernetes API, but it's an external one. The queries are written by a deployment, not the Kubernetes API server. So because we did that, we have the SMA metrics service here installed. It's an API service, and now that we have installed it, now I can do a query actually on a metric. So I'll go ahead and do a Kubectl raw query on the API service. So here what I'm doing is that I'm doing a query on the SMI API service that the adapter installed, and I'm querying for the Prometheus deployment in the Linkerd Viz namespace. So this query essentially returns the metrics for the Prometheus instance in the Linkerd Viz namespace. So because I did that, you can see automatically that it returns. So this is the format that we use currently with SMA metrics, where the API replies with the following metrics for each deployment that you specify. And this could be deployment, pod, namespace, etc. So it's pretty flexible that way, that you could be like, give me all the latencies for the namespace Linkerd. So it adds up all the deployments and their metrics. You could even go ahead and ask granularly for a pod even. So the API is granular that way. The adapter understands the resource type and then does the query. So as you can see here, we have P99 latencies, P90, P50, etc. but this is only for Prometheus. But you would want to see how metrics per each edge, right? So this means that these are the Prometheus metrics for all its edges, for every connection that Prometheus gets, essentially. So now we'll go ahead and we'll ask for the metrics at each edge. So for example, because Prometheus does interactions mm, with all the different kinds of things, right? Like I mean, it scrapes metrics from everywhere, essentially. So if we do edges for Prometheus, this list is huge because it's specifying the latencies for each edge, essentially. One other thing to note is that Linkerd Viz also gets so in the edge we also specify the direction on which the metrics are being showcased. So for example, if we do a Prometheus is not a great example because it's on the outbound side, right? Like Prometheus is asking is scraping metrics from others, but you could go ahead and install an application service. I can try doing that. So there is this emoji order service that we use for demos. So once we do that, we can essentially query even for them. So we could essentially go ahead and do emoji auto. Show me the metrics for deployment and the web service for the web deployment. Obviously, we just created that and it will take some more time before things are made. So things ran. So essentially, while installation happens, so essentially, as you saw, irrespective of the underlying mesh, right? It could be Istio, it could be Linkerd, etc. Once you do a query, you get the metrics in the same format for any application, for anything essentially. So currently we support Linkerd. Linkerd is supported in the repo. There is an Istio implementation too, but I think a lot of things changed in Istio after that. There was this telemetry v2 that changed a lot of things, so I'm not sure if it works yet. I think folks should try out first. So as you can saw in the example, so now I'm asking the metrics for the web. As you can see, for web, there is an edge from VoteBot. So VoteBot is an automated client that keeps sending requests for web. As you can see, we can see the traffic metrics on each edge and on a specific direction. So this is all just the metrics from VoteBot to web service in emoji auto. So there are these other things too, right? So for example, VoteBot also, the web service also tries to talk to other services, like like the like the emoji service, and these are the metrics for that, etc. So essentially, that is my demo. Yeah. So essentially, you get a singular plane of glass for any underlying implementation to read metrics out of a mesh.
Taruna, of some of the specifics in that implementation, are so to summarize, like the current extent of SMI metrics as a spec, and as you've demonstrated through this implementation, like the implementations may differ, but the spec itself is oriented toward well, curating top level metrics that an operator would be that would be like the what's the most bang for their buck, the highest fidelity metrics, if you will, the ones that are the most insightful. So the top line, and you know, underneath the covers, are those by and large Prometheus queries that are being done by the, okay, so pre-curated, you know, P99, and also the directionality of the flows of the traffic, you know, between those edges. And so that's, you know, very insightful. And so, you know, quickly to your point, like, I mean, just in internalizing, sort of articulating the value of SMI metrics is, you know, fairly short, well, ubiquitous, a ubiquitous interface by which you have short time to value of these top line metrics across the apps that are running on whatever mesh you're running. And so, so there's a lot of value there. The Kubernetes native integration as well, that, you know, So I have a few, I'm going to stop asking questions for a moment to let Sumku reflect. I have a few others to.
Good point, Lisa, and thank you, Tarun, for the demo. It's really helpful. From my perspective, one of the biggest confusion point, given my background and my nature of work right now, is enabling service mesh for 5G and edge deployments. The word edge is kind of conflicting in that sense, but not just that. The way I see this, the traffic metrics, as we call it, at the P90, P99, a lot of these latency metrics. Right, so these from our perspective, that so far the discussions I had are more of not observability per se, but more of a KPIs that we, from a performance standpoint, like what are these KPIs that we looking to see effectiveness or the mesh utilization or right, so or the overall performance of a service mesh, right? So one is transactions per second, another is latency, right? Two main things that we see. So categorizing this as metrics, right? So I'm just getting to see the SMI spec on traffic metrics, but and it's kind of confusing in that sense, because these are more towards KPIs than observability side of things, right? So when you start looking into Prometheus and what's the whether infrastructure resource utilization or pod utilization or pod metrics, so I see a little bit of conflict there. But ideally, so one side to look at this from a performance aspect is, okay, between two edges, what are my metrics that I look for, P50 or any other latency numbers. From an overall performance standpoint, right? So these are between source and destination within a cluster, between two pods or between services is one aspect. But I think the performance characterization aspect would be much more encompassing with respect to what would my infrastructure be, right? What's underneath my Kubernetes cluster, right? So how would it impact performance versus between different clusters or within a cluster, pod to service, service to pod. There are a lot of these topologies that we could consider and say, how is my service mesh impacting overall performance of my Kubernetes cluster? And from a spec perspective, it touches upon the key part where you're getting the metrics between source and destination, but we might have to kind of characterize it or slate across these other dimensions where it impacts the performance, right? How do you configure a lot of these underlying aspects of a Kubernetes cluster and service mesh configuration where it impacts the performance? So that's something I'd see that would be helpful from an overall SMB perspective.
Yeah, this is
Yeah, SMA metrics is more of an application level kind of metrics, right? So that was the intention, at least from the start. Yeah, but I see how I mean I see what you're telling. Yeah.
Right. No, I agree. And end of the day, in a production environment or any deployment, that's what it matters, right? You have your day 0, day 1 configuration all done, and now it's all about how are my applications performing. But I think the discussion is about looking into how SMI and SMB can work together, right? So in that sense, this is one aspect of overall performance. Analysis of performance characterization. Now we have to kind of build on top of this, either in terms of specification or in terms of implementing this and introducing it into a mesh with a simple. I think your demo is great. This is a good start. I think to build on from there, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know that the format of this discussion is only brings us halfway to, well, it only brings us like 1/3 of the way to like the data that we need. Like there is and I honestly don't know that we're in a good position to do it right now, but there's a sort of a cross presentation back to, and actually I don't think we didn't, like this, there would be a good thing to do would be to grab some time on the SMI community calendar to present SMP and what it entails. And Sunku has begun to articulate what some of that is. And in many respects, actually, so Tarun, so by the way, thanks for coming on. Thanks for the demo. It's good stuff. To Sunku's point, like SMI metrics hits the sweet spot for what people, like what they need to immediately know to know whether or not it's a green light or a red light, or like, and or where they're starting to have a yellow light, so to speak. And sometimes that's the app, sometimes it's the infrastructure underneath. I think a lot of the reflections there about infrastructure-centric metrics are orthogonal to what you're presenting. Like it isn't it's not a reflection on how good of a job SMI metrics has done, I guess, or please don't receive it as such, like that there's any kind of a miss. That's not the, but just as Sunku in specific goes to internalize what SMI metrics is, for him to look at what SMP is trying to accomplish and how, and then begin to understand whether or not, how, if, and or whether or not, yeah, the two can either, and I hesitate to like go into like begin to suggest things because really there's a presentation that needs to go back about SMP and what it's trying to accomplish. Sunku touched on some. I'll try to say a couple of others, which is that there are, well, here I'll bring the service mesh performance roadmap up because just at a high level, it characterizes part of the scope of the project itself and what, where the focus is intended to be. So both Nick and Sunku, I think, were kind of the last to touch on this. So as a precursor to a broader, to a separate presentation of this, at its core, or SMP itself is a spec, and isn't the implementation. As a project, though, it does have a number of softer goals or information disseminating goals around, common workload profiles, like being able to help inform people about whether or not they're really running their infrastructure in a performant way or not, like in a comparative way. It's to, some of that is around publication and sort of the running of benchmarks and the publications of that analyses. And so some of that, not all of that, hopefully that's represented within the spec, but not all of it is of the spec. So not all of the goals are of the spec. As you go to characterize the performance of any service mesh, or really, like in some respects it's just the mesh that's interesting to measure, and period. For many others, it's the workload and the mesh. And for others, it's the workload, the mesh, the orchestrator, the infrastructure down below, and then all of the myriad permutations of those configurations. And that's kind of the crux at what the spec is aimed at. It's not really aimed at describing your workload. There are other specs that do that. It wasn't really aimed at describing so much the function, like it does try to capture and describe the functionality and configuration of your service mesh. And that's actually a good, like where that overlaps, where that config overlaps. That's an ideal spot to potentially characterize that in an SMI format. So if there is, I think we talked about this on an SMI call some time ago, is like, if there's a traffic spec and that characterizes a particular protocol or a port that requests, the traffic is transiting. Okay, well, that's an opportunity to use the same descriptor, use the same spec to characterize that. I think what we'll, as we look at these two and we try to embrace the overlap and potentially extend that yeah, we'll find that SMP wants to be quite detailed and not concise in nature, whereas I think we'll find SMI by virtue of a couple of facts. I think one, that it's it's not intentionally trying, it's by its nature being lowest common denominator in some, or it's hitting the top level use cases and it's reinforcing those by hitting those somewhat quickly and refining them over time. And as we're seeing with like SMI metrics as a spec, and as if we were to open up SMI traffic spec, that we would see that those only go so deep, or they don't capture all the things that you would want to if you're going to articulate what one 5G network looks like and its workloads, and characterizing its performance versus something else. And part of the question that we'll go to ask ourselves collectively is, because I'm for my part, I'm really truly trying not to lead the answers or lead the questions here, is how much of interest is that between the two projects to, I think, to reuse and to potentially bring them under one umbrella? Like, is that really helpful? And I think in general, like, having more people and more eyeballs and on things is generally helpful. It's like there's more people pushing, rowing the boat the same way, like pushing the.
Sorry, go ahead.
That was leading the question, by the way, what I just said. I guess I was trying to be encouraging of like earnestly exploring. Part of that is how painful is it to spend, like right now we meet in an SMI community, we meet once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, and good. I'm not, I think Sunku, it would take him 30 minutes to present a performance analysis of a given environment and of a given workload, and that's fine. Like, hey, we meet more frequently or change the charter or have separate meetings that are more performance oriented versus functionality oriented, which is what SMI is. So those are. So could you want to characterize some?
No, thanks, Lee. It's a really good point. I mean, last few months I've been looking into various performance aspects of a service mesh. Across the community, I've been searching. There's no one specific way or standardized way of representing a set of KPIs, representing set of results, right? I look into Istio, they have a certain way of showing some of these results. Looking into Envoy, they have a certain way of sharing some of these tests versus how the results should be understood, right? So, and what I see here, either through SMI or SMP, is to not just a deployment or not just a test methodology or a common way to understand some of these results, and that is heavily missing. I mean, for example, some of the tests we have done, we've shared in the Service Mesh Con that's happening tomorrow. Between Otto and I, we were looking at inconsistencies in traffic generators, load generators, right, versus how these metrics should be understood. Each different community has their own way of sharing some of these metrics. So standardizing some of this effort in terms of a specification, in terms of examples, right? So that would be a really helpful point across the service mesh community. And this effect is very huge. I would say have a high impact on how these metrics or traffic KPIs are understood in a 5G type environment, because latency and performance is everything on 5G environments, and milliseconds, microseconds count, and that's one of our role is to optimize some of those things on hardware. But yeah, so and understanding this across, talking to some of our customers, right? So there's this gap as to how it's some of these things are run versus deployed versus understood, right? Or what software stack we use and how to configure some of these things. There's that huge gap that I do see, and there is an opportunity to kind of make it uniform or standardize some of this. And with respect to roadmap, what you're sharing, I think yeah, it would be really good to understand SMI's interest on some of these, because creating a spec with traffic metrics, what it is right now, versus encompassing overall performance aspects across the whole stack, from hardware all the way to your application. There are many layers in between, right? So looking at all of those and figuring out how performance models should be specified, right? So those, that is a conversation to have. And we've been looking at different topologies, different infrastructure types, and different tests. To give an example, how complex this can be, and how would SMI be interested or looking to work together on this, I guess is the question.
Yeah, so just as S&P folks go to digest more fully the different aspects of SMI on this call. So one of those that makes sense to take a look at, or just even for me to refresh part of my memory about traffic specs, which is a potential area of collaboration or overlap, or either between Tarun or Michelle, or do either one of the two of you want to characterize it slightly differently than I had about the identification of protocol, port? There's more to traffic spec than that. So, okay. Good. And
Yep, I can try doing that.
okay. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't worked a lot on the traffic spec side of things. I've been only on the traffic metric side of things. But I think it allows you to group a route, right? Essentially specify a route on which you would want to do a specific filtering or anything like that. But I'm really not sure on the specific stuff here.
So yeah, and some of how deep that goes is probably protocol specific, well, which makes naturally it is. So if it only goes so far as, or if you're dealing with TCP and you're specifying in TCP, then you're able to go about as high up as ports, and so similar for UDP. So gRPC. Okay. Now, one of the nice things about the HTTP group, or this layer 7 protocol, is that it can get a lot more detailed. And yeah, this is one of, like, from an SMP perspective, or at least from my perspective, that this is one of those nice areas of reuse, or like when this roadmap was written with this statement here: enhance service mesh configuration model, the model that SMP has for how a service mesh is configured, with the integration to, I think we said with maybe too many times, but with an integration to SMI, or in consideration of SMI. It's like, this is potentially a really good example of, like, a lack of desire to reinvent the wheel. But what needs to be assessed in some detail is, like, what can't be expressed here, or if there is anything that can't be expressed here that one of the service meshes might. But even then, like, if the answer was, right now you can't express certain things in the HTTP route group that traffic mesh is capable of, it's like, well, okay, well, that doesn't mean that SMP shouldn't, or that it wouldn't be desired that it doesn't use this spec. Rather, that just means work can be done to enhance the traffic spec. And so some early thoughts. So okay. thus far for the SMI folks, do we have more of a roadmap on traffic metrics that we've been tracking?
Not one that we've been tracking. Nick and I and Stefan have had some conversations around how to like grow traffic metrics and what the next steps are, since it's good for dashboards, but maybe not other types of more performance heavy tasks. So, so I think that's like one of the things that I think Nick is going to bring up at an SMI meeting.
Nice. Okay.
Specifically, like we want to see how we can better metrics so that tools like Flagger can use it.
So yeah, so I guess I'm trying to bite my tongue a little bit on suggesting on sort of suggestions about how things might come together, or if there's a desire for them to meld. And I guess I'm biting my tongue mostly just to post presentation, or maybe that's like once we've kind of walked through some of the details of service mesh performance and done a demo of it, like how does it, I would rather that other people were making suggestions than me, is what I'm trying to get to. What probably in a healthy way, or in hopefully a nice way, what adds to the consideration is that of Meshery as well, which is, we don't need to, I mean, like, yes, that is another topic. It is another point of consideration. There are other maintainers there to have to reflect that basically, like, I don't know, maybe we could hit it in one fell swoop somewhat quickly. But yeah, it adds to the thinking. Okay.
So one question for towards the SMI folks who've been with SMI for a while. So what in terms of performance versus the reason behind creating traffic specs, for example. So I know from what I see, there is specification of what things should be or could be, versus people contributing a set of adapters or set of CRDs or SDKs towards the SMI community. So it's trying to understand the scope of SMI community. Is it supposed to just detail a specification and say, here's the set API methodologies you could follow, versus are you also looking to have a set of implementations from that sense that it's not just a spec, but you have example implementations available within the SMI community?
I can jump in. Definitely want to have implementations. In fact, it's I think an implementation first approach. The spec comes later for us. So it's like we've seeded the APIs as the current CRDs as functionality that already exists and it's common between implementations. And then anything new is really driven by someone going and prototyping this thing first in their implementation and saying, hey, this would be good to have in SMI, and we should do X, Y, and Z, and then proposing it and getting it merged. So that's definitely the philosophy behind it. In terms of scope, I'm not really sure if we have like an outline of what the scope is necessarily in writing. But to me, I think it's really to provide a common interface so that there could be a unified ecosystem around service meshes. So like lots of tools being able to use the functionality that service mesh provides without actually having to be implementation specific. Anything in that direction, I think is the right direction, in my opinion.
That's great. The reason I ask is, so from a performance standpoint, because this can be another subtopic within an SMI, right? So focused on performance and how it could evolve. So in that sense, there is a scope for us to kind of discuss and take it further. Because some projects, they just want the spec to be there, and implementations can be, your own thing, kind of thing. So it's good that from a scope perspective, it's pretty open for anything related to service mesh.
Yeah, I think being able to give folks a common way to measure the performance of service mesh technologies is definitely something that's going to benefit end users. And I think it's a welcome topic in the community.
If we can start it as a separate doc, right? Separate thing, and then maybe see if there are any mutual thing with traffic metrics. Then we can start seeing what are the common parts and then using stuff, right? Maybe that could be a better way rather than starting from traffic metrics.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice. So to Michelle's point, and so Otto is with us. And Otto, I don't know how long you've been on, but we did record, so you can catch the earlier demo.
Good evening.
Hello. Very good. Well, so I think we're at the tail end of the call, actually. So, Otto, did you have anything you wanted to add before? I don't know how long you've been on or not, if you've had anything you wanted to add.
Well, I've been on about 10 minutes, so I think I missed the probably the most important part. It's a shame.
So the next, which might be anyway, well, I'll send you the recording. We'll Sunku will help characterize it a little bit, but the next step here is to grab a one-off time with as many of the SMI folks as we can get to present SMP and all of what it is trying to consider, the world hunger that it's trying to solve. And then begin to hash through some suggestions on how to align, whether or not to try to bring them under the same umbrella, align them in particular ways, unalign them, or just what that clarity is. And some of us represent both projects, and I think there's more than one of us that does that. And so, which is healthy, which actually just shows alignment and an interest toward both. Tarun, in advance of us getting a time on the calendar, there is SMP itself, there's some amount of info on this site here. So, but we'll cover that when we meet as well. Does anybody want to add anything else before we conclude?
So in terms of sharing the SMP part, Lisa, this current SMP details talk about what can be good or what's good with it in terms of performance. But I guess in terms of implementation, Meshery comes in, right? So Meshery would be the tool that we discuss here about how you can actually deploy and test and understand performance. So if you're sharing about SMP, you kind of need a way to say that, hey, here's how you deploy and understand these performance metrics. So do you see that you would go into Meshery example with this, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, I think you're probably right that hey, one of the things, so both SMP and Meshery are up for consideration. So the CNCF has said that they desire to have these projects, just as they go to admit them and try to introduce them to the rest of the world. Are we collectively, how do we provide clarity to the world and to those that are participating and looking at what the projects are doing? And so So to your point, both projects need to have diligence done in this way, like to explore. Yeah, I don't know why I keep on being so sensitive. I guess because I'm sitting like right in the middle of a lot of this, but it's to explore whether or not, I think there was a suggestion, should they all three come together? Should two of them come together? Should they all stay separate? How do they reinforce each other? And it's very much so been for my part, I'll say it's very much so been the desire, and it's demonstrated publicly time and time again that they're intended to be intertwined, minimally quite intertwined and reinforcing of the other. Performance is such a tough thing, a big, long, deep, wide thing to produce, and it's sensitive, and it's tough to get right. And yeah, that was like one of the first goals of the Meshery project, was to enable users, let them answer their own questions and in a repeatable way. And so you're right. Like as we go to describe, it'll help as we go to describe what the spec itself is, SMP. It'll reinforce an understanding of what that spec is if you see an example of it being implemented. Moreover, Meshery itself needs to have the same line of questioning asked against it. And so we may as well do it. May as well try to accomplish what we can in the same motion. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good.
Fair enough. Well, all right. We'll do it. We'll ping we'll send out a doodle or something. We'll find another meeting time. I really appreciate the fact that Michelle, you helped get some other folks on. It's really nice. Please do, everyone. Like that. I guess next time we meet, you'll be able to digest what SMP is, and hopefully a bit of what Meshery is as well. Maybe to Sunku's point, maybe we should be very intentional about trying to present both of the projects at the same time, so that it's a holistic consideration. I don't know. I don't know if that conflates and confuses or what, but I'm certainly open to whatever people want to do, in terms of however many meetings people want to have. We can also use other forums or reuse forums. So the SIG Network forum it's going to get fairly packed shortly, but it's a first in, first out. So there's time there as a forum. The TOC has welcomed this discussion on a CNCF TOC call, which is fantastic. I think that everyone will have a hard time arguing publicly. Like it's just kind of a sensitive thing as people go to digest and understand. Not everyone will not make a suggestion. Like I've just made it through this whole meeting, hopefully, and not suggested that something happened. That won't happen on a call like that. People will suggest, okay, these two things need to get renamed, and then you do this, and you put these together, and it's like, well, first, that would ideally come from SMI, each of the project maintainers, as to what they think is. So see, so everyone have a great KubeCon. We'll get a meeting on the calendar probably next week to do more of this with more people.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
And implementation
Thank you
plus
so much.
presentation would be fine, Lee, if you want to do both at the same time. Be
Okay.
great. Have
Nice,
that.
good. So we don't drag it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.